Welcome everyone. It's a great honor to have with us today Ambassador Manuel Hassassian, who's the ambassador of Palestine to the UK. And when an ambassador from Palestine comes to speak, what he has to say is tailored to the audience. It's the same with all speakers. Now, Ambassador Hassassian knows that he's speaking to an interested, informed academic audience, and this is no problem for our speaker, because our speaker is a distinguished academic as well as a political actor. He has his PhD, he's been Dean of Humanities, University at Bethlehem. He teaches conflict management courses in America. And he's been involved in the peace process for many years and involved intimately, obviously, in Palestinian politics. He's very informed on the strategies of the Palestinian Authority, the current peace negotiations, or lack of them. His relationship is a close relationship with important actors throughout the world, and he can answer questions on anything you wish to ask in connection with the Israel-Palestine conflict. So it's a wonderful opportunity to listen to someone who is working in this area on a day-to-day basis, who is involved in the preparation and analysis of policy and the implementation of policy. Manuel came to this university in 2014 and gave a wonderful talk then, so you're in for a treat. The way it's working today is that we're going to have something like half an hour, 45 minutes, being informed by Manuel, and then possibly the most interesting part of the day will take place after that, which is the questions and answers. And I've taken part in lots of events like this, and it really is the opportunity to discuss things in a question and answer that brings the whole event alive. So I look forward to you guys participating. When the time comes, the way in which participation will take place is there's a button in front of you for your mic, and that will amplify your voice in the way that mine's been amplified at the moment, and it'll be recorded for a recording of this event that you and future students can look back on and learn from. So, I give you Ambassador Hassassian.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Professor Greg. It's always a pleasure to come to Leeds University, and this is my second time, and I hope it won't stop. This is becoming a tradition. Although I have been here 10 years now, ready to move, and hopefully I will be moving to Washington. But in case I stay here, I would love to come again and speak to you. I always have goosebumps when I talk in universities because it makes me reminisce my 30 years of academic experience and background, where I have always been a professor since the age of 26 when I got my PhD at the University of Cincinnati, Ohio. I spared no moment in researching and in teaching. So, as you can see, academia is in the veins of, in my veins and in my blood. And I love to come and talk in universities because I've been, not teaching for a long time, especially only basically during summers where I have my vacation. I don't rest. I take that vacation, go and teach in the United States of America. So it gives me great pleasure to be with you here. And you're not going to expect a propaganda speech, neither a speech that will make you happy or upset, but a speech that will make you think. What is this conflict all about? And as a professor, you have to be as objective as you can. And don't misinterpret my passion when I speak with emotions, because I am deprived of any emotions when I talk about my conflict, especially in academic backgrounds. Now, I do understand that, when I come to a university, I'm addressing an audience that is involved in one way or another with the Middle East or with the conflict or related subject matters. So I'm not talking to people that are not knowledgeable. Neither, I hope, I'm not talking to those people who are converted. So I'm not preaching the converted here, but I will try to stimulate your intellect and brains to ask me questions that could be tough and challenging. And this is what I expect from you after I finish my speech. You might agree and you might disagree with what I'm going to say. But in the final analysis, you are the ones who will make the judgments, and not me. In political science, we try to define the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And we try to see what are the common parameters with any kind of conflict in the world. We came to an inference that the conflict between Palestine and Israel is a unique conflict that has certain characteristics which makes it outright in its, value. And we have decided to consider or to code that conflict as a protracted conflict. Protracted in the sense that it is a conflict between two epistemic communities that have been fighting each other over the same piece of land. And these two epistemic communities emanated from an ideology that was affected by the Enlightenment period during the latter part of the 19th century in the Ottoman Empire, where the Arabs were under the rules of the Ottoman Islam, and the Jewish minorities who were scattered in that part of the world are part and parcel of the Middle East and under Ottoman statutes and law. So with the advent of the French, or the concept of nationalism, the French Revolution, what have you, this had a direct effect on the national minorities living in the Ottoman Empire and were affected by the trends of nationalism and the concepts of nation-state, freedom, equality, fraternity, and what have you. And that's why we started to witness a certain kind of an insurrection by the national minorities against the Sublime Porte, basically in the Ottoman Empire. And I don't need to give you a lesson of history today, just to say that during the same time, Arab nationalism and political Zionism emanated as a result of the impact of the Western influences, which made it at a later stage two nationalisms that were opposing each other to the point that political Zionism eventually has fulfilled its messianic dream of building Eretz Israel and to have the Palestinian land to become the state of Israel when war was declared in 1948, in which, Israel won the war and declared its independence. All I'm trying to say that the element of Palestinian nationalism came to the fore exactly when the British mandate came to Palestine, as mandated by the League of Nations in the year 1920, where France was mandating Syria, Lebanon, and what have you, and the United Kingdom, Britain, was mandating Palestine, Transjordan, and Iraq. And of course, the UK, the British state for almost 3 decades, in Palestine, withdrew in 1947. As a result, they have recommended to the United Nations that the only solution to this conflict is the partition plan of 1937, which came to the fore as a result of the Peel Commission that came to the Palestine after what the Brits calls it the disturbances. The Arabs, Palestinians call it the Arab-Palestinian Revolution. So my speech starts with the Nakba. And the reason why I want to start with the Nakba, to give you the historic touch, is the fact May 15, which is coming up, is the commemoration of the Palestinian Nakba. And Nakba means catastrophe, where we have been commemorating this every year. And this year it will be the 68th anniversary of the Nakba. And Nakba means displacement of the Palestinians. It means the continuation of living in exile. It means the Nakba is ongoing while our refugees don't have the right to go back to their original home. Although that right was guaranteed by the United Nations 194 resolution, but of course it has never been implemented since it was a General Assembly resolution. And as you know, General Assembly resolutions are not legally binding. UN Security Council resolutions are legally binding. But still we cling to that resolution where the Palestinians who were forcefully diasporized as a result of the war, as a result of the massacres that had been committed by the Jewish gangs at that time, the Zionist gangs at that time, killing Palestinians indiscriminately in their villages and in their cities, which forcefully pushed them to be diasporized and to live in exile until today. And at that time, almost 800,000 Palestinians were refugees. And from that moment, the refugee question became part and parcel of solving this conflict, because without the right to return to their homes, there will never be a final solution to this conflict. We have seen many attempts, time and again, by the Palestinian Authority to go back to the United Nations, and we can discuss that later, is to regain the confidence of the international community within the Palestinians by recognizing their state. And many attempts have been tried, and eventually 2 years ago we have been accepted as a state in the General Assembly, again by 138 countries. Today in September we're filing again to the Security Council, hoping that we will have 9 out of the 15 Security Council votes in order to place it for voting. So far, America has torpedoed every single attempt by having the 9th vote in order to put it on the table and vote for it, and they have managed rightfully so. And that's why, we did not have the chance of having, any voting in the Security Council concerning the recognition of the Palestinian statehood. So from 1948 until now, we have a conflict that has never stopped, convulsive violence that has never stopped, that made the entire region of the Middle East insecure and unstable. I can dare you and say that the insecurity and the instability today of the Middle East and what is going on today in the region is part and parcel of the non-solution of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Nobody can disagree with this argument for the simple fact that we have seen since 1948, almost 68 years now, we have seen instability, insecurity, and violence reigning supreme in that part of the world. There are the ups and downs, embarked in peace talks, then in violence, peace talks. The cycle of peace and violence, continues every 10 years in the Middle East, but in the final analysis, we never had to reconcile our differences in ending the claims and in ending this conflict. Today, what Israel is doing today is trying to create facts on the ground. As a matter of fact, when we signed the Oslo Agreement in 1994, we thought by 1999 we will have our independent Palestinian state through what was designed to us an incremental approach, starting with the redeployment of Israeli forces and ending up with Palestinian statehood. But what we have witnessed in the year 2000 is the failure of talks at Camp David between Palestinians and Israelis, between Barak and Yasser Arafat at that time, sponsored, of course, by always the late United States of America. And it was the last 6 months of President Clinton being as president, rushing it to have a conclusion for this conflict. And of course, it was not prepared well, so it was a dismal failure. And as a result of the failure of the Camp David, we were encountered with another bloody intifada, which is referred to as the Second Intifada. And the Second Intifada continued with a stalling of the entire peace process, where there has been no contacts between Palestinians and Israelis, except meetings here and there, nothing serious since the year 2000 until the year 2016. We have contacts, but we don't have real direct negotiations. So I can say that the political process is totally stalemated. And that's why, when you ask me today, where are you on the issue of Palestine-Israel, I tell you, as I said in my interview with Sir David Frost, I told him then, before he died, God rest his soul, I said, Palestinians and Israelis today are stuck between the historically inevitable and the politically impossible. So we need a third party, basically, to expedite the peace process and to try to narrow the gulf of inequity, especially in our positions when it comes to the final status resolutions. And what we have witnessed is a laid-back third party, let alone a third party that has been all along history for the last 22 years unequivocally supporting the top dog Israel over the underdog, the Palestinians, where we never felt that there has been direct negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis, because those were not negotiations as much as they were diktat of power politics. We had lost our interest, we had lost our enthusiasm, we became desperate, we became not hopeful, we became frustrated that the Americans are not going to deliver the goods at the end of the day, let alone the EU, which is totally also divided when it comes to foreign policy. We have the EU headed by the Troika, Germany, France, and Britain, where Britain takes the lead. And when we talk about the United Kingdom's position, when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, all the time we hear the nice political discourse. Yes, we are for a two-state solution. We are against settlements because they are a breach of international law and an impediment to peace. Yes, we are against United Jerusalem. They talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. So in the final analysis, another big disappointment for the Palestinians is the position of the UK that bears the historic and moral responsibility in the creation of the State of Israel and in the displacement of the Palestinians. This is something that you don't take the responsibility, but your ancestors, your governments, take that responsibility. That responsibility should be shouldered by the UK. That's why we always thought that the British people can understand the psychology and the mentality of the Arabs, and especially of the Palestinians. We don't want the Yankees, the Americans, to come and solve our problems, because we don't believe that they understand the psyche of the Arabs. And this reminds me, when Lawrence of Arabia one time was asked how much he loves the Arabs, he said, I gave my body to the Arabs, but never my soul. We don't have that, when it comes to the United States. So we are disappointed. And I am also disappointed more and more when I hear statements by your Prime Minister, Mr. Cameron, whom I have met several times and talked to about our conflict, where he had empathy and sympathy, but never had any political action to move forward in putting any kinds of pressure on Israel. When he makes a statement in the Knesset saying that he is a proud British man in creating the State of Israel. And when I say creating the State of Israel, I refer to the Balfour Declaration of 1917. A.G. Balfour was then the Foreign Secretary, and he wrote a letter to Lord Rothschild promising him a national home for the Jews with respect to the rights, the civil and religious rights of the non-Jewish minorities. And the Jews at that time in Palestine were 6%. And he refers to the 94 Palestinians as a minority. And the trick in the Balfour Declaration is that it has been interpreted or explained to us, because it was couched in such an ambiguous language that there was a big debate in the League of Nations, 52 different interpretations of that paragraph, where A.G. Balfour, upon His Majesty's government, promises a national home for the Jews in Palestine. Now, if he had mentioned the political rights, then I can accept today the fact that Cameron, when he says we are for a two-state solution, he should have spared no moment, instead of abstaining in the United Nations, in recognizing the state of Palestine. And as you know, next year, this government, the conservative government, I'm not saying the people, is going to mark the 100th anniversary or the centenary of the Balfour Declaration. Are you proud of displacing a whole nation and creating, a country without even considering 5 million Palestinians living under occupation, in accepting the state of Israel as the bastion of democracy, while Israel today is considered to be an apartheid state with its systematic policies, in the occupied territories? How could that really jive? To have a democratic entity, and yet on the other side of the seat of Jerusalem, it is an occupier. Ladies and gentlemen, this is considered to be one of the longest modern occupation in history. 100 years now, this conflict has not been solved. As a matter of fact, every day it is becoming much more complicated. Now, Israel is continuing with a systematic policy of what I call land theft, creeping annexation, building more settlements, creating new facts on the ground. And by doing that, they think that any kind of negotiations in the future would be irreversible to the conditions that they have created. Today, settlements have been tripled, even quadrupled since the Oslo Agreement. Settlers have quadrupled. Today, we have almost 680,000 settlers living in the West Bank and in the environs of Jerusalem. What is left of the two-state solution is that, the West Bank has been divided today by 3 clusters of settlements that led the West Bank to be geographically non-contiguous, let alone totally separated from East Jerusalem, which is our capital of the future Palestinian state. And of course, Gaza, the 1.8 million people living in such a small strip, one of the most congested areas in the world, are living under siege, are living under embargo by the Israelis by land, air, and sea. And there is, of course, as you know, no connection between the West Bank and Gaza except through a small stretch between, that is considered to be Israel. I mean, if Israel doesn't give us that piece of land to make the connection or build a bridge or what have you, and this was the intention when we were supposed to have our state, then Gaza will be totally separated. So when we talk about a two-state solution now, and when I look at the map, it's like a Swiss cheese now, the West Bank. It's Swiss cheese with islands of archipelago, with no connection whatsoever, and still we are talking, and the international community is talking about a two-state solution. I cannot see a two-state solution with 760 kilometers, 8-foot slab of concrete, wall, 760 kilometers all the way from the north to the south of Palestine. What Israel refers to as a barrier or a separation wall, what I refer to as an apartheid wall. Because a wall could be really built on your borders, and that's fine. We accept walls. Maybe high walls make good neighbors, or high fences make good neighbors. But you don't build that wall 10 kilometers deep into the West Bank. That is not for security reasons, that is for political reasons. It's a political message that the West Bank is still in the minds of the Zionists as Judea and Samaria, and this is the land of biblical prophecy. So we are dealing today with a religious and ultra-religious government run by Netanyahu, who is not willing to budge any inch when it comes to territorial concession, and I hate the word concession, because, you know, we have already made our painful concession in 1988 when we have accepted Israel on 78% of historic Palestine. So Mr. Netanyahu is not conceding that 22%. These are occupied territories accepted and acknowledged by the international community as occupied. We have resolutions 242, 338. We have the Arab Peace Initiative. We have the Clinton parameters. We have the quartet statements and what have you. We have all the tools to come to a compromise between the two parties to the conflict. But unfortunately, the current government in Israel prefers to continue with its creeping annexation and building settlements and not having any kind of talks. Of course, you know, the objective conditions regionally is helping, you know, to make the situation even more cataclysmic in the occupied territories, because it is so unfortunate that today's international community is focusing on what is happening in the region, especially what's happening in Syria, and by doing that, they're marginalizing the main conflict in the Middle East, i.e. the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So, you know, where we stand now, basically, is at critical moments where the Palestinians have opted for nonviolence, as you know, and we have, you know, been cooperating, collaborating on security matters between the Palestinian Authority and that of Israel to make sure that there will be no suicide bombing or no physical attack against Israel or Israeli civilians. However, on the other side, what we are witnessing is something totally opposite: military incursions, hot pursuit. All army and settlers are, you know, in the West Bank, in every single city, in every single village, and what have you. And in the final analysis, it is pushing now the authority. And update, just before I came, there was a statement made by Saeb Arikat, the General Secretary of the PLO, saying that there is going to be total stoppage of communication and collaboration when it comes to security. So there is no security collaboration between the authority and that of Israel. This is just recent. It just happened. I've heard it before coming, to give my talk here. So everybody was saying that, you know, how could you cooperate while Israelis are killing indiscriminately our kids, putting them in jail without due process of law, demolishing houses, cutting trees, confiscating land, seizing IDs, you know, all these practices that I don't need to talk about. You see it on television. There is no need to talk about how ugly and repulsive occupation is. Occupation is occupation. Liberation is liberation. There is no two ways about this. However, we have stuck ourselves to a strategy of peace with Israel. And President Mahmoud Abbas has been a very pragmatic president. Pragmatic in the sense he has been trying to choose between constraints. It's not to his liking, but he has no other choices. We cannot play into the hands of the Israelis, because we did in the first Intifada and in the second Intifada, first Intifada in the second half of the first, and in the second Intifada, we played with fire. And we paid a heavy price. The whole West Bank was totally annihilated, and my house was totally annihilated by a TOW missile that was shot by an Apache helicopter to my house. And I was lucky that I, with my late wife, God rest her soul, and my 3 kids, we were at the end of the house, so it came in through in the middle. And I cannot describe to you the havoc and the fear when you have a missile hitting your house while you are sitting at peace. But it made me more believe in a conviction that there will never be, and read my lips, that there will never be a military solution to this conflict. Israel, with all its mighty power, will not and cannot succumb the 5 million Palestinians anymore. And what we had learned from our Nakba of 1948, we're not going to revisit that. And Israel, with all its mighty power, it's the 4th largest army in the world, cannot subdue the 5 million Palestinians. and will never bring security to its own individuals without resolving the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Now, it's a matter of time. Maybe not in my lifetime, maybe in my son's lifetime, we will see an agreement. Because it's inevitable that Israel could continue to be supported by the United States and the international community. It is inevitable that Israel cannot continue to live like a pariah state. They cannot continue to live with a siege mentality in a fortress where they are always obsessed psychologically that they are going to be one day driven into the sea. That kind of psychological perturbance is not going to allow the Israelis to accept the challenges that will come forward once the dust settles in the region. Once we have 1.8 billion Muslims understand the fact that Israel cannot continue with its archaeological digging under the Al-Aqsa Mosque, where that is going to turn it into a religious war, and it started that already, with the idea that finding the second temple and building the third temple. And Israel cannot really continue to believe that the Palestinians are going endlessly fighting each other between Fatah and Hamas, and that the Arab world is not going to stay in chaos and anarchy the way it is now. So what are the future prospects for the state of Israel, given all these objective conditions changing? I believe that the crescendo of power is to make concession when you are at the crescendo of power. And there are many ways where Israel can really get back into the peace process. We have the Arab Peace Initiative, the Clinton parameters. We have parts and the remnants of the Oslo Agreement. We can go back to the negotiating table, but we need an interlocutor that is honest broker. I personally, if my president hears what I'm saying today about the Americans, he will be very upset with me. But I cannot but say that I'm totally disappointed by the American brokerage of the peace process. Now, nobody is doubting the fact that Mr. Kerry has put his blood and soul into this. But we haven't seen any kind of changes on the Israeli political behavior. And we haven't seen enough pressure being put on the Israeli side. Unfortunately, the Zionist AIPAC is so strong on Capitol Hill that the Congress is the #1 enemy of the Palestinian people. So, if we look at the EU is like what, 29 countries or 27 countries? You know, my math is terrible. We haven't seen any consensual foreign policy agenda there. There are bilateral relations. Some countries are pro-Palestinians, pro-Arabs. Other countries are pro-Israel. So they are totally divided. But what the EU is doing is providing, the sustenance of occupation by giving pittance to the Palestinians. That's what the EU is doing. We haven't seen the EU being, politically active in the process of bringing the parties together. But we hear, one idea comes from here, another idea comes from there. Now we have the French initiative coming to the fore, having an international conference, putting an agenda so as to revive back the negotiations, the bilateral negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And as the French always said, if this fails, we are going to recognize the state of Palestine. After one phone call from the United States, they have rescinded from the recognition of the Palestinians' statehood. So, who trusts, the EU or the European countries if they lack the political will and the political power to go ahead and push for the peace process? And that's why Israel is sitting now in the driver's seat so comfortably, driving their Lamborghini with no sweat. You have a divided Arab world, chaos and anarchy. You have the United States paying heed to its own, elections, primary elections. and they care less about the peace process anymore. All their interest now is Daesh and Ma'ish and what have you in the Middle East, and especially in Syria. The Arabs are impotent and divided. We are divided between Hamas and Fatah, unfortunately, but we are left with one option: to continue our diplomatic posturing, to continue our filing to the Security Council to become members of the international conventions and to be members of the international bodies. And thank God we have been in most of them, especially UNESCO, where your government, sir, has voted in abstention. And even at the UNESCO, they voted in abstention. And they have never recognized the Palestinian state, although when you sit and talk to all these officials, unfortunately, they are so embarrassed in front of me when I tell them, you talk the talk, but you don't walk the walk. Because this is true. They did not recognize us at the General Assembly. They did not recognize us at UNESCO. They're not recognizing us at the International Criminal Court, where we became members. They did not recognize us when we became members of the International Criminal Court. So what is the United Kingdom doing, except following orders of the United States of America? This is the British Empire, ladies and gentlemen, that ruled over the world at one time. Where is this? Where is the spirit? Where is the character? Where is the public posturing of such a great country to be totally subservient in its foreign policy, especially when it comes to the Middle East and in particular Israel? We don't see any independent position by the United Kingdom. It is so unfortunate that we see such a situation developing. And I say that with all honesty. I've been here an ambassador 10 years. I don't interfere in your internal politics here because I don't understand exactly how Labour and Conservative, work, but I don't meddle in the internal affairs. But, in the final analysis, it's Tweedledum, Tweedledee. One thing that I could really, be proud of the British public, of the Scottish people, of the Welsh people who went to the streets and changed the whole perception of this conflict by understanding that the Palestinians have a just cause. They have the right to self-determination. This is one of the 16th amendments of the Woodrow Wilson, where every single nation in this world had practiced the right to self-determination except we, the Palestinians. Even Israel, the Zionists, have practiced the right to self-determination. I have seen during the last 10 years a dramatic shift in public opinion here, where I have seen more support to the Palestinian cause, more support to self-determination, more support to Palestinian statehood. I'm proud that I have been part of this process with many organizations here that diligently have been working to raise the stature, the awareness of the Palestinian plight. And last year, I did not share this with Professor Craig, I won among all diplomats and politicians the #1 award as the best ambassador in the UK for raising awareness for his country. That means that we have to make total distinction between my criticism to the government and my real admiration to the people. And one thing I need to solve out before I leave my post. I want to see how this democracy, which is based on the consent and the will of the people, when I see 278 parliamentarians, voting for the statehood, and they have accepted the Palestinian state in the vote at Westminster, and you remember that 2 years ago, right? How come that has not been concretized into an official recognition by the government of Mr. Cameron? If the system of democracy works between input and output, where, the people has a certain say-so, with the freedom of thought, with the freedom of movement, and what have you, and the freedom of expression, how can not that voice being concretized and translated through a filtration process where decisions come out as a result in the context of a democratic entity, and we don't see that. So where is the democracy here? I think there is a big hypocrisy, I'm sorry. Although I'm a secular, so it doesn't mind if that was a slip of the tongue. But the hypocrisy of this democracy cannot really be tolerated. And people cannot really be continually fooled. You tell me, when Israel, can I put this back on just for the sake of, you tell me, if this government has time and again said that settlements are an impediment to the peace process and they are a total breach to the international law and conventions, right? Systematically. Now, if I walk into Mr. Cameron's office, he will give me the same cliche. When the grassroots organizations here started to put pressures on Israel through BDS, and starting with the boycott of settlement products because they are illegal, the present-day government, and here I have the right to talk about this government because it affects me, it affects my people, criminalizing all those organizations that take funds from the government when they practice BDS against Israel. Don't you think this is a total contradiction? I think this is the pinnacle of the oxymoron. You say, and you tell us that settlements are illegal, and you have been all the time having a consistent policy on that. And when BDS takes place, you criminalize it and you act against it. But Israel is acting with impunity. Israel is an apartheid state. Show me one country in the world have bypass roads where we cannot use that roads. It's only for settlers and Israelis. Show me a country where I cannot go and pray, neither in the Holy Sepulchre as a Christian or as a Muslim in the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I need to get a pass. You remember the word pass. This is South Africa. It's exactly the same practices being implemented, by Israel. And I don't need to keep on continuing to tell you how ugly the practices of Israel against the Palestinians. It is a total ethnic cleansing process today, what is happening in Jerusalem and in the West Bank. Israel is interested in the geography of Palestine. Israel is not interested in the demography. Israel does not really want the Palestinians to stay. They want to take over the West Bank as part and parcel of Judea and Samaria. I cannot see any hope with such ultra-religious right-wing government in Israel. I cannot see any type of reconciliation. I cannot see the reinvigoration of a peace process between the two parties while you have such a government. It is so unfortunate that Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to be the Prime Minister and continue to be the Prime Minister. He doesn't want to prejudice his premiership for the sake of making concessions and sitting with the Palestinians. He wants to continue to be the Prime Minister. He is interested in being a Prime Minister, not interested in salvaging his people and bringing them, to the security shore. This is not leadership. There is a crisis of leadership in Israel. We're not talking about Rabin. We're not talking about Ben-Gurion. We're not talking about the pioneers of Israel who had a vision. We're talking about myopic, short-sighted leaders. And those short-sighted leaders are going to bring calamity and catastrophe to the Israeli people. Maybe not today, but in the years to come. Because Israel cannot continue to act with impunity and cannot continue to subdue 5 million Palestinians. In the year 2020, we are going to be almost more than the Israelis. So it will take a genocide to get rid of the Palestinians. What else can Israel do? How could they displace us and dispossess us except through genocide? Can Israel do that? Can the international community bear that? I don't know. Here lies the $1,000,000 question. We have done our share, and we have made our historic, painful concessions. We have said political accommodation is the only way out. We have agreed to a negotiating process. That negotiating process had its ups and falls, but in the final analysis, we have determined that there will never be a military solution. How can we go about achieving this without having a potential partner who believes in the same convictions? So, unless sense comes to Israeli politicians today and to the leadership, unless the Europeans become more proactive, unless we have some regional stability, I don't see any course of action. Now there is the game on the game in town. It's the French initiative of convening an international conference just to bring back the two parties together, and there will be a meeting at the end of this month, basically, without the presence of the parties, as I came to know from my friend, in order to put the agenda and to kick off again, the peace process. I'm not that optimistic, and I'm not that pessimistic, and I'm not that optimist, but I'm hopeful that maybe something could happen that could really make things change in the Middle East, put more pressure on Israel. Maybe Israel public opinion will change because, the Iranian file and the emergence of Daesh are the two tickets that Netanyahu today has been using against terrorizing his people for security. And that's why they have been totally, my goodness, they have totally been alienated from anything that is called a peace process. And they have voted the way they have voted in Israel. We hope that public opinion will change. We have to work harder in gaining back the leftist progressive elements in Israel. We have to be more politically active in the international arena, and we have to publish more. Now, I realized, when I came, I was publishing in the Independent Guardian, and then for a long time, I was engaged also in political talks and what have you. But recently, I've been publishing in the Independent and the Guardian. I don't know if you have seen my articles, but you can see them, What I tell you here, I said it there, and everybody has read exactly what I'm saying. There will never be any solution except through political negotiations. It cannot continue to be zero-sum conflict. It has to be a win-win situation. And I don't need to go into the theory of conflict management where I teach to tell you that there is no other alternative for the existence of Israel except to understand one basic reality. Without having an independent Palestinian state side by side, democratically, there will never be Israel continuing the way it is continuing today, with impunity and using its excessive and brute power to submit and subdue 5 million Palestinians. This is not going to work out. It failed in the past, and it will fail now, and it will fail in the future. The only sense that Israel should have now to understand that America is not going to continue to be the unipolar power, and it's not going to continue to look at Israel as a strategic asset in the region. This is going to change, ladies and gentlemen. The Muslims are not going to see the Al-Aqsa Mosque being crumbled by the digging underneath, and the Arabs are not going to accept the state of Israel while it is still occupying lands, and the Palestinians are going to be united, whether they like it or not, to defy occupation. So the odds against Israel are in the future coming. And time is not on the side of Israel. I think Israel today has to make its historic decision, whether to be accepted by the Arab and Muslim nation states as an integral part of the Middle East by withdrawing from the occupied territories, or opt to continue its occupation and ceding that to the state of Israel. And the consequences are going to be grave. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're now going to have some question and answers. I'm just going to give you a moment more to think about your questions while I ask my own question. You talk about a democratic Palestinian state side by side with a democratic Israel. But at the moment, there have been no elections required by the Constitution. You have no workable agreement with Hamas to bring about this sort of vision of a democratic process. So why isn't that happening at the moment, and how do you see that as being resolved?
My friend, Israel does not want us to hold elections. Israel is prohibiting and creating facts on the ground not to have our elections. Second, Israel will not allow East Jerusalemites to be part of the elections because they claim that it has been unilaterally united and that Israeli Jerusalemite Arabs who lives in Jerusalem as residents should not vote. And as you know, Gaza has been totally separated. We don't have access there for any kind of elections. So first of all, Israel doesn't want elections. Second, Fatah and the authority, they want elections. Hamas is not ready. Now, yesterday, there has been, a statement made by Saeb Erekat, who is the General Secretary of the PLO Executive Committee, that local elections are going to start in the West Bank. So we are. First of all, we believe in elections. And in 1996, we had elections, and it was not rigged. It was observed by the international community. We had also 2006 elections that was not rigged when Hamas won the elections, and it was not rigged. It was, passed with the flying colors. And we have managed to build our democratic institutions, as you know, and you've been to Palestine. We have our parliament, we have our legislative council, we have our institutions, we have our organizations, we have a vibrant, dynamic civil society, we have all the elements of a democratic entity. But we cannot say that we are not democrat because the circumstances are not helping us. As soon as there is reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas, we are going to have elections and a national unity government. And this will act against, the consent of the Israelis. Israel wants us to be totally divided. And by being divided, divide and conquer. But I can say, we are the only Arabs who have practiced democracy par excellence. Show me one other Arab country that their president was not elected by 99.999%. At least my president was elected by 63.2%. And now, if elections will take place, maybe he does not get 51%. But this is democracy. This is how we have learned. This is how we have learned, how to build a democracy under occupation. And we managed to do that.
Questions, let's allow me to gather some questions around the room. I think we're going to start from this end. So what I want you to do is to make your question, I'll gather about 3 or 4 questions, and then Manuel can deal with them. So starting, probably the best thing is to press the button on your mic, and then everyone will hear you better.
And I think to suggest the possibility of a genocide especially taking into consideration what international institutions are attempting to do in their eyes in order to try to achieve peace, let's say through UNRWA schools, with their education system, which of course encourages jihad, martyrdom, these things which have been proven in their education curriculum. Also the fact that a lot of their speakers openly encourage Palestinians to go and stab Jews in Israel. They're hunting videos.
To do what?
To stab. You know how for a few months now, randomly, a lot of Jews in Israel have been stabbed. So I think to suggest that it's only Netanyahu who is stopping any form of peace process from going ahead, it's personally I think extremely naive to believe, and to not be able to see that Abbas can do so much more in order to further the peace process. I would just like to kind of see if you cannot see at all that kind of the Israeli side of it, whereby, because if we are talking about the mandate, sorry, my question is going on quite a lot, but we are talking about the partition of, let's say, the Palestinian mandate, of the British mandate with Palestine. What happened with India and Pakistan, it wasn't very dissimilar. Actually, more people died, there were more refugees, yet there isn't that much talk about it because both sides have a territory, but there is India and Pakistan. So if there were to be Israel and Palestine, which there have been chances being close to achieving it, yet unfortunately, let's say that rather than there was no possibility of it furthering. Do you really not see that the Palestinian side can also kind of make more efforts to achieve this peace process? Is it all to blame on not just Netanyahu, but on Israel, especially when, of course, a lot of Israelis disagree with their government. But even if they weren't to, surely the other side of this conflict would be able to, in some way, impact the peace process.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next question. We'll take two more questions.
Okay.
I think
well, thank you for the talk. Mine gets quite short and a bit speculative. So I'm just wondering, concerning the recent refugee crisis in Europe, if and how would you see that sort of influence European politics in the future, for example? I guess I'm meaning that Scandinavia to be a bit of a player in European politics. How do you think it's that in sort of solidarity here, or would that influence in any way future politics?
Okay, we'll take one more. No? One more from this section? Okay.
Yeah, so you spoke about the vote in Parliament in 2014 to recognise the state of Palestine, and that was passed. I know there's also been votes in France, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, all to recognise Palestine that have all been passed. So I was wondering how come these have passed through Parliament, but then none of the governments have subsequently recognised Palestine? Why there's sort of this a divide between government and Parliament?
Okay, we've got three questions to start with. I think the first one was to do with recognising some element of Palestinian responsibility and whether or not genocide is going a bit too far.
No, I heard more than that. I heard a political statement representing Israel, discourse there, which is very nice, that creates a certain kind of a debate. First of all, I didn't say that Israel will commit a genocide in the year 2020. You have to be careful when I say something, let it. What I said, no. I said Israel, by the year 2020, there will be a majority of Palestinians there. What will be the options for the Israelis? Is it going to be a genocide to get rid of them? Or is it going to reconcile? Because they cannot continue to maintain the status quo while there is a demographic imbalance. This is what I was suggesting. I said, can the international community accept a genocide, modern genocide in the 21st century by Israel? Of course not. And Israel is not dumb enough to do that. But Israel is practicing an ethnic cleansing process of deportation, of making life impossible for the Palestinians, and in creating conducive conditions where convulsive violence is the name of the game. You talked about stabbing, right? And stabbing is the ultimate frustration of the youth that are being, totally encircled in Jerusalem, where they don't have any prospects of future, where they cannot find jobs, where they cannot move from one place to another, where they cannot go to the West Bank or vice versa. And they're using the minimum weapon that they have in their hands to show their frustrations as a result of the impunity, as a result of the punitive measures that Israel is taking against them by totally controlling, all the streets of Jerusalem, by incarcerating, youth without any due process of law. And you want them just to sit idle and not to express their opinions. While you accept the fact that the settlers who act as hoodlums go and pillage villages, kill people, throw gasoline and fire on young babies in the occupied, and you don't even mention those as act of violence against the Palestinians, and you are just talking about the Palestinians inciting violence while you're not addressing the main issue, that occupation is the main issue for all this violence that is happening. And you are saying that Mr. Netanyahu is doing basically his utmost, but Mr. Abbas is not doing enough, and his people are not doing enough to go back to the negotiating table. How could we go to the negotiating table when Israel all the time breaches all the agreements that we have signed? We were supposed to have our pre-Oslo prisoners out of prison by now, and now, until now, they have not been taken out of prison. They were not being released. We have been asked by Netanyahu time and again that he will put a moratorium on building settlements. Nothing has been done. The continuation of building settlements, the continuation of the building of the apartheid wall, the transformation, basically, of settlers into the occupied territories of the West Bank. These are not signs that are coming from Netanyahu's government willing to sit and have peace, my dear. It's not Mahmoud Abbas. We are the underdog. We have strip-teased ourselves to everything that we could have done in order to have a peaceful agreement with them. And we have been collaborating so far with the Israelis on every single security issue. And you tell me that the Palestinians and President Abbas should do more than that? I think you should go and look at the facts on the ground before you make such statements, because these are biased statements that are not acceptable. I'm really sorry to hear, instead of saying, yes, we do take the blame, but it takes two to tango, and to sit down and go back to the peace process. Don't look at the glass as being half empty. Look at the glass as being half full. That we had negotiations going on for the last 22 years. How can we reinvigorate that negotiations? How can we go back to the negotiating table? It does not really take a great deal of effort, to go back to the negotiating table. We have been always ready to negotiate with Israel, but Israel has not accepted the conditions of stopping building settlements, the conditions of hot pursuit in areas A. They control the entire West Bank. Might as well, if I were Mr. President today, Mahmoud Abbas, I will just give the keys to Mr. Netanyahu, because we are all under occupation. Let's not fool ourselves with area A, B, and C. We are still under occupation. And what is happening today is not that Israel is maintaining the status quo, it is creating new facts on the grounds that makes it impossible with such mentality today in Israel to have a peaceful solution with the Palestinians. I'm sorry to say that. These are the facts of life. When it comes to the EU and the role of the Scandinavian, we salute Sweden. Sweden was the only bold country in Europe that came forward as a government and not only as a parliament to recognize the state of Palestine. And we hoped that other countries will have the same courage to come forward and recognize the state of Palestine. We have a full-fledged embassy. My embassy is not an embassy, it's a mission here. It's a diplomatic mission. Parliaments, and this, tries basically, I try to connect that with the question on parliamentarians. This is where I don't understand your democracy, my friend. This is what I mentioned. Parliament people, vote something and the government does something else. What kind of democracy is this? And I think this is autocracy. Blemished with nice democratic frills of expressing your opinion and what have you. But that expression of opinion is not being concretized into actual reality. When your parliament, which is the representative of the people, recognizes the state of Palestine, what does it take to Mr. Cameron to recognize the state of Palestine? While he is saying all the time, we are for a two-state solution. Of course for a two-state solution. You recognize Israel, but you don't recognize the Palestinians. So where is the recognition of a two-state solution? And this pushes me to say to you that if the situation continues like this, where there is no hope for a two-state solution anymore, if you go and look at the Swiss cheese and what is happening with settlements in the occupied territories, I don't see any two-state solution coming. By de facto, we have to opt for a one-state solution. And of course, one-state solution, for me, is a one-man, one-vote. For Israel, one-state solution is basically to maintain the status quo and control the 5 million Palestinians under something called, administrative arrangements where they can collect their garbage and what have you, but they will never have their political, independence, neither they will have their borders nor their flags and what have you. So that's the one-state solution for Israel. They already made their choice. We have still clinging to the two-state solution because the international community is still, with the international law, everybody is pushing the Palestinians and the Israelis to recognize the two-state solution. This option is going, to disappear very soon because on the ground there is nothing left in the West Bank to talk about a two-state solution. When Jerusalem is totally isolated, when Gaza is totally isolated, when the West Bank is, as I said, divided into major clusters, there is no hope for a two-state solution left. Then, I think Israel is pushing for a one-state solution, but that one-state solution is not the maintaining of the status quo of occupation plus. It's going to be a different ballgame. And that different ballgame will be picked up by the Palestinians to fight for their civil and political rights in what is so-called a one-state democratic state. Whether Palestinians or Israelis are living there, they have the right to vote and they have the right to express their opinions. It cannot continue to be an exclusive Jewish state. That is not going to work. It will not bode with 5 to 6 million Palestinians today, let alone 1.8 million Palestinians who are discriminated against as Palestinians holding Israeli citizenship. I didn't talk about that. That needs another lecture to show exactly what is Israel and what is Israel is doing, as a democratic entity. So my friend, I don't have any faith in these democracies, because these democracies only pursue national interest. And that national interest is only for the elites who have vested interests. And today the world is being ruled by what C. Wright Mills have taught us, the power elite, the military-industrial complex, the multinational corporations. So let us not be fooled that governments rule today. It's not that the governments rule, it's the multinational corporations who use the governments as tools. So the concept of democracy is a charade for me. And that's why, when we see parliamentarians voting, and, of course, we revered that. We had receptions. We cheered in the streets. We were so happy to see that, the British Parliament was the pioneering parliament in recognizing the state of Palestine. But did this change anything in the attitude of the government? Nothing. Yes, sir.
So, a lot of interesting things coming out there. I was interested in the way you said that in the absence of a fight for a two-state solution, then the struggle becomes over what a one-state would look like. And the struggle then is not a struggle for a state, it's a struggle for civil and political rights of a Palestinian majority within that one state. Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. Let's work from this side into the middle. We're not ignoring the questions in the middle for the moment, but we'll come back to them.
You mentioned the lack of interest of the United States and the
And as well as Arab states, perhaps you could think about the role of Turkey recently as well.
Well, you know something, I don't want to go and meddle in the internal affairs of the Arabs. We have been the victims of Arab politics for so long now, my friend. But let me tell you, with what is happening today in the Arab world, with the chaos and anarchy that we're witnessing, always say our hearts goes to the people who are dying today and who are suffering under such regimes that have been so autocratic. It's about time that there should be a genuine social revolution in the Arab world. These are not considered to be revolutions as they claim to be. These are protest votes of people, of youth who have been disappointed with the questions of democratization and what have you. And that's why, you know, what we're witnessing today is a melange of several factors. Factors of change, social change that has been, you know, initiated in the beginning. Today it is basically monopolized by political parties, by fundamental Islam that wants to control under the ideology of Daesh and what have you. And God rest, please, we don't want to see Daesh, you know, we have enough on our plates. But such an Arab countries are not going to help. And the League of Arab States, as you know, is totally impotent now. You know, what can the League of Arab States do? Back before the Arab Spring in 2002, when we had, you know, a total unity of Arabs on the issue of Palestine, we came up with the, you know, Arab Peace Initiative. And that Arab Peace Initiative today does not hold any ground, because today what we're witnessing is a different Libya, a different Egypt, a different Tunisia, a different Syria, a different Maghreb, and what have you. So I wouldn't really count on the unity of the Arabs for the time being. And I think charity starts home. I think the Palestinians should have their reconciliation, I agree with you, between Hamas and Fatah. And we should form our national unity government and try to have our elections, which is very important, our legislative elections, presidential elections. And, you know, I wouldn't count too much on the Americans and the Europeans, because the Americans have proved to be dismal failure in this peace process. 22 years, where are we now? More lands have been taken, more settlers, more settlements, more acts of violence on the ground, no hope for any peace, no peace talks whatsoever. I mean, what did the Americans do? You tell me, 22 years. What did the Europeans do more than being payers and not players in the peace process? You tell me. So can we count on the EU? Can we count on? We only count now on the international community through the United Nations. 138 countries have recognized the state of Palestine, but only one woman soldier in Jerusalem on Kalandia checkpoint would not allow my president to cross to go and pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque. I mean, what is this recognition meaning to us when it is not implemented on the ground? It's nothing. These are all symbolic gestures. We went to the United Nations in order to contradict the statements of Netanyahu that the West Bank is a disputed territory. We went there to show and accepted the recognition of the state, to show the world that these are occupied territories and not disputed territories as being alleged by Netanyahu and the present-day government in Israel. This is why we went to the United Nations. We are not naive not to understand that such a recognition is not going to make real life easier in the occupied territories. Because as I said, one simple soldier would not allow President Mahmoud Abbas if he doesn't have the pass, the permit to enter Jerusalem and go pray in Al-Aqsa Mosque. So these are the facts on the ground. You know, and still we are being focused that we're not doing much. Every time there is an incident, we hear the slogans, Mavet to Aravim, in Hebrew, death to the Arabs. These are not incitements. Our curriculum has been revised many times by the Americans, by the Special Task Group, and still the same rhetoric is being used. Incitement. Incitement against occupation is wrong, but occupation, subduing Palestinians through brutal force and naked aggression by using F-16, it is legitimate. This is a hypocrisy, my dear friend. What else can we do more than we're doing? I am today addressing you, and some of the people think I'm a traitor because my government is collaborating with Israel over security issues. And still, we're not doing enough.
Mara?
Well, you had mentioned that in order for the Palestinians and Israelis to go back to the negotiation table, then you need an honest power broker. So from the Palestinian point of view, who would be that honest power broker?
The United Nations.
I mean, okay, so the United Nations, like the major powers within the United Nations are almost the same countries that you deem not honest about power brokers. So how would that work?
When there is a will, there is a way. If the United Nations sponsored this peace process, okay, yes, in the Security Council there are 5 powers that have the veto powers, including the US, China, Great Britain, France, and what have you. But when I say brokering the peace in the United Nations, it does not mean that only bilaterally Palestinians and Israelis will sit with the third party, but that peace will be solved at the international conference, where all UN resolutions will be put and voted on, okay? And where, you know, all these big powers have to commit themselves to the resolution of this conflict by peaceful means, where we have, you know, experienced the honest broker of peace, and it proved nothing except to be futile. So where do we go? Where do we go when there is a major conflict? When there is a conflict between, let's say, Ethiopia and Egypt over the Nile, you know, where do we go? Do we have to go to the United States of America? That's why there is the United Nations. And United Nations should be the arbitrator for any kind of conflict in the world. Unfortunately, I totally agree with you that most of these conflicts have not been resolved through the UN because of the intervention of power politics, because of the intervention of big powers. But how long are we going to accept this reality and not to change it? Because there will be time where these young and small states will have their say-so eventually. And it cannot be totally monopolized by one country or 2 countries and what have you. Because also those countries have vested interests in the rest of the world. And they don't want to jeopardize their national interest because of their position when they see Israel is becoming a strategic liability for them rather than a strategic asset as it is now. So things will have to change. And that's why I cannot tell you which is the best institution, but you know, I have to tell you that there is nothing except the United Nations. Give me another option, I will cling to it.
Okay, we've got time for another round of questions. Some guys here. Can we collect more than one question? Okay.
Just a quick one from me. Obviously, the peace process has stalled with direct negotiations between the 2 sides. And the last attempt in front of the Security Council finally failed. And you mentioned they're going again in September.
Do you want to just use your mic one?
Between the 2 periods, what has the PLO and the BAS been doing to make becoming accepted more acceptable to the members of the Security Council? And obviously we talked about getting representation in front of the UN being the most important thing, but what other independent measures have Palestine been taking to become recognised as a state?
Okay, do you want another question or are we going to deal with that one? Okay.
I think this is a very good question. Yesterday, I just gave a big talk to a big community at Milton Keynes. And after I spoke for 1 hour and answering all questions, I ended up debating Palestinians. I wish there are more Israelis. We could have seen a better debate between Israelis themselves over the course of action. And they were telling me, you know, what is your government doing? What is Abbas doing? Your president, it's not their president. First of all, you know, I have gathered this experience. Whether Jews or Arabs or Palestinians who live in the diaspora so comfortably, they can afford being too extreme in their positions. Believe me, if I have my Israeli friends, and I have many Israeli friends, and I teach every year for the last 25 years. By the way, I was the first professor to be spending his sabbatical at the Hebrew University in the Harry S. Truman Peace Center. And I have an Israeli professor who is my partner in teaching for the last 25 years at the University of Maryland, College Park. We have published zillion articles together. And I have so many Israeli friends who empathize with the two-state solution, who are against Netanyahu and what have you. I don't want to speak about that. It doesn't mean that we have, a strong position against all Israelis. No, Israelis are also divided, on the issues of peace, on the issues of holding to the settlements. They're divided. It's a democratic country. It's a democratic people. And so there is a debate amongst themselves. What is the best course of action? It is so unfortunate that the extreme right-wingers today are haunting the leftists in Israel because, as I told you, waving the Iranian nuclear firearms, waving, the Daesh security threat and what have you. The Israeli public is in a state of hysteria now. They're so afraid and obsessed by the emergence of new ideologies in the region that could jeopardize their security. We legitimately understand that, but we don't understand that kind of a statement or state of being to be translated in being more ferocious in the brutal act against the Palestinians and in not really trying to put their hands with the Palestinians and get the peace process, back on the table. Everything is negotiable, my friend. Now, my question to you, my answer to you actually, not a question, is the fact that the Palestinians have give up on something called armed struggle, have give up on the idea of a military solution, have given up on using arms against Israel. I think the lesson that President Abbas have learned, and he was among the top people in the PLO who said, let's not militarize the Intifada. I was before him on television as a humble professor, and that's why my house was shelled by a TOW missile, to say that militarizing the Intifada is bringing catastrophe to the Palestinians because we're playing with firearms, and this is what Israel wants. Second, we're alienating our social progressive elements in Israel that have been supporting the Palestinians, especially Peace Now and Meretz and all these, parties that are considered to be leftist. We have decided to continue with our diplomatic endeavors, continue to get more recognition, try to press the United Nations for the recognition, get more signatories, bilateral, between us and many countries in the world, sign the international treaties and conventions, try now to bring war criminals to the International Court of Justice and to the International Criminal Court, try to hire lawyers to represent us, basically, in The Hague for all these criminal acts that have been committed against our people, whether in Gaza during the wars or in the occupied territories, and continue with raising awareness about what Israel is doing, and by the same token, to fight, settlements and settlers because they are illegal. And of course, the government of Palestine does not interfere in the question of BDS. We don't have a position on that. But BDS, if it comes from the people against, Israeli goods, that's their choice. But we have a position on settlement goods, not Israeli goods, settlement goods, because settlements are built on illegal land, occupied, and that's why BDS against those. And now, of course, there is a certain kind of, boycott of Israeli goods. This is voluntarily from people. As you know, Palestinians are the number 2 consumers in the world after the United States of Israeli goods. We are totally subservient to Israeli economy. 98.5% of our total good commodities come from Israel. Besides, the labor force of Palestine who works inside Israel keep the money in the country. It does not go out, unlike when they started bringing people from Africa or Eastern Europe, where the money goes out. but the labor money stays in the occupied territories, basically stays in Israel. So we are pursuing, such an act, and we still believe that there is no other way of solving this conflict except going back to negotiations.
So just one final question. You said that there is tremendous pressure on the Palestinian Authority to end security cooperation. Can you see that realistically coming to an end, or is this just a threat?
Well, you see, we have heard this many times, and it did not materialize. The Americans will put pressures on President Mahmoud Abbas. And by the way, I don't want to talk about, the meetings that I was involved in and how the psychology of hypnotization takes place when we sit with the Americans. Do this. Eventually, you give up. You said, get the hell out. Okay, fine. So I don't know whether it is serious enough or not, but I don't see any reason why we should continue with this security collaboration when we are being now perceived as quislings, when we are being perceived as cooperating with occupation against our people, and I don't think that will give more credibility to President Abbas. So I think the Israelis are putting us in that weak spot and that weak position, to make such a drastic move. I believe security cooperation, yes, it helps in the process when we have negotiations, where we try to control the situation on the ground and to make things doable. But how could we keep on acting on behalf of the Israeli occupation by subduing our people, and in return we see our people being killed and incarcerated, put in jail, while we are, being perceived as collaborators, So it's a difficult position. So I don't know whether this time it's going to fly or not, but given the facts on the ground, given the position of Netanyahu, I think, this is something that the Palestinian Authority has to take in its hand as a trump card, as a pressure tool, let's say, to stop, what is happening in Jerusalem and what's happening in the West Bank as far as the settlers taking the law in their hands. Maybe that would be a deterring factor, But I don't know whether it will hold true or not. I can't answer that.
Okay, all right. On that point, I think we can bring this to an end. Thank you to our speaker.
Thank you.
Thank you for the interesting questions and comments and for the general discussion. And thanks for coming along on such a sunny and lovely day.